driver's license testers. What's the worst thing a kid has done without batting an eye while taking the driving test? My dad was friends with a guy who worked for the registry giving the road test. His best story was of a kid who took his test while it was raining. He started driving without the windshield wipers on. The guy figured he was nervous, so tried giving him a break, saying, "Oh, it's raining pretty hard, huh?" The kid was white-knuckled on the steering wheel and just said, "Yeah." Again, trying to give the kid a break, he said, "Don't you think you should do something about that?" The kid once again said, "Yeah." Apparently, he didn't know where the wiper controls were, so he rolled down the driver's side window and stuck his head out. At that point, he stopped at the test and failed him. Story 2. Wasn't my kid. My 80-year-old great aunt. The tester kept telling her to speed up. After a few times, she said she can't see the speedometer, so she doesn't know how fast she's going. He made her pull over and she did not receive a renewal, thank God. Edit. Life pro tip? Drive extra carefully around pharmacies. It's usually crowded with old people. It's one of the few places they need to drive to. Story 3. The kids make minor mistakes, and yes, some do make scary mistakes. However, it's the adults who scare me the most, especially the seniors who are up for re-exam. Probably the worst test I've ever been on was this man in his 90s. I instructed him to turn onto a street when it is, quote, safe to do so, and he turned, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Not only that, but he was driving on the wrong side of the road, and he came head-to-head with another car who pulled over to let him go. He was laughing about it because he was under the impression it was a one-way road. When I got back to the office with him, I cut the test short and got him in the quickest and safest way possible. He was astounded when I told him it wasn't a one-way street. Did you see any one-way signs? No, but I assumed you were going to make me take one. Huh? That is some next level of confidence in yourself. To be driving on the wrong side of the road, see a car coming the other way, and not once questioning, am I wrong? Honestly kind of impressive, but also for the best that he is not on the road. Story 4. My dad did testing for a few years, and he once had a girl stop on railroad tracks. There was a train coming slowly, but still takes them a long time to stop, and it blasted the horn right into the car, passenger side with the window open. This made her freeze up even more. He had to reach his foot over to her side to hit the accelerator. Edit. In Canada, you can do your driver's test in any car you choose, because in theory, you should be good enough at driving to not need an instructional car. So this car did not have dual pedals. Story 5. Opposite kind of story here. When I was taking driver's ed, I was in a car that had the brake on the passenger side for the instructor to use, just in case. Going 35 down a fairly busy street, my car all of a sudden comes to a complete stop. In horror, I look over at my instructor, who is sound asleep with his foot on the brake. I just sat there dumbfounded. After a couple of people honked real quick, he shook himself awake, mumbled a quick, "Accelerate," and sat up adjusting his glasses. So, that was fun. Edit. Yes, I did pass. Guy was in his 70s and just didn't care about anything. Story 6. Okay, 3 stories. 1. My ex drove a GeoTracker tiny car. She pulled right into the parallel parking area and fit in so unbelievably easy the tester made her do it properly. 2. A girl in my driver's ed class failed her test when she went to the DMV because she turned into oncoming traffic. Not only was there a grass median, there were some of those skinny red and white poles for about 10 feet followed by a guardrail. Each side of the median was 3 lanes. There was really no way to miss it, but well, she did. And 3. On a lighter note, I did the backing up 100 feet. When the tester told me when, I stopped, and before I put it in a park, he asked me a few verbal questions, then proceeded to give me directions to leave the area and back to the parking lot where the parallel parking test would be done. Never put the car in drive, so I pressed the gas and the car went flying in reverse for about 20 feet. He apologized and said, "Oh, that's my fault for distracting you. As far as I'm concerned, that never happened." Story 7. I was the kid, and full transparency, it was a learning drive, not the test. We had to do 6 scheduled drives with our instructor and had a partner. One would drive for half an hour and then you would stop and switch so the other could drive. The rule when you got into the car, just so it wasn't a constant game of should I turn, was that you should always go straight until the instructor tells you to turn. So one Saturday we had a very early scheduled drive. We met up at the school and I was the first to drive. We got about 5 minutes in, turned onto a main road, and the instructor fell asleep. My partner and I quietly, with a smirk, agreed we would still follow the rules. We took the road for about an hour and 15 minutes until it dead-ended and you had to turn. I pulled over in a parking lot and we woke up the instructor and asked him which way to turn. It took a good 30 seconds for him to realize what had happened and where we were. He yelled at us both to get in the back seat and we witnessed some very unsafe ways to drive as we headed back towards the school. And I didn't bat an eye. Story 8. In my local area, a guy in his mid-20s failed the test for some reason. At this point in time, the results of the test were shared in the car. After being told he failed, he proceeded to get out of the car and grab an axe out of the trunk. I don't know any more details beyond that, but apparently that's why results are shared inside the licensing building rather than in the car. Well, yeah, I guess that would be kind of precedent setting, huh? No reason not to, I guess, but wow, what an edge case. Story 9. As someone who worked in the DMV for many years issuing driver's licenses, even though I wasn't a license examiner, I think I'm the closest thing to your target respondent so far. The craziest thing I ever witnessed with my own eyes was a dude who somehow managed to lose control at less than 15 miles per hour, jumped the curb, and smashed into the guardrail. Needless to say, he was not issued a license. The best story I ever heard from a coworker happened immediately after she came inside, swearing a blue streak because, during a part of the test, where the examiner stands on the curb in order to observe maneuvers, her customer drove up over the curb and straight into her knee. Story 10. Not a tester, but there was a license center next to the sporting goods store I worked at. A lot of people would come there and practice before their test out front in the straight-on parking spots. A young lady who only had her permit managed to mix up the gas and brake and drove right through the front of the licensing center. I was told later that she was even more upset when they wouldn't let her reschedule her test for the following day. As they had canceled her test she was pulling in to take when she wrecked the whole front of the building. It wasn't long after that they installed a bunch of bollards in front to protect the building. I was amazed at how marked up they had gotten in the first few months. Story 11. Not a tester, but I heard about a girl in driver's ed who was driving on the interstate with the teacher and 3 other students. The teacher commented that they missed the exit, but they would just get off on the next one. I'm not sure what this girl's thought process was, but she pulled into the grass and tried to go against the traffic to go back to their missed exit. The teacher had to use her brake on the passenger side while the other 3 students screamed bloody murder. Story 12. My father used to tell stories of when his dad worked at the Massachusetts registry. One story, and these are with names changed, he told, there was a kid who was taking his test who was awful, but was really stuck up. Somehow he had gotten my grandfather's name, so after the kid tries to act all slick and pull strings. So he goes, "I know Chuck Lafitte." My grandfather, giving the test, says, "Oh, really? You know Chuck Lafitte?" Kid's like, "Yup." No you don't. I'm Chuck Lafitte. Kid did not get a license that day. Story 13. Several in one day, actually. I wasn't the tester, but I was waiting in line to get my test with about 30 other people. 1. The car they were trying to use didn't have valid registration or inspection. Fail. 2. The car had no brake lights. Fail. 3. The insurance was expired in the car. Fail. 4. Put it in reverse instead of drive. Nearly backed into the car behind them but didn't. Fail. 5. Ran over the parallel parking cone completely. Fail. 6. Hit the curb turning left out of the lot somehow. Fail. These were 6 different people who went before me. It was beyond frustrating. I waited over an hour for 6 out of the 10 people in front of me to not even make it out of the parking lot. Well, OP, at the very least, this must have filled you with confidence. You're like, oh, so I'm going to be nowhere near the worst they've seen today. That's good. Story 14. When I was sitting my test, I asked the tester how many tests he did in a normal day. His answer was 10. Not all that surprising, until he followed up with this. 10. And 8 will fail before making it out of the car park. I asked him to elaborate, and apparently the vast majority of test sitters will fail for administrative reasons, like arriving late to the test, not bringing their existing learner's licenses, or having a vehicle that wasn't road legal. The latter was more common than it sounds, when all lights/turn signals/horn are tested in the car park before the test itself begins. Fail any of the above, and you've wasted $75 and never even gotten a gear. Story 15. Kind of the opposite of your question. Actually, the worst thing a tester could do. Gets in car, a little hatchback, and he's a huge man and can't fit. Says he will fail me unless I can get a car he could fit into. Within 15 minutes, by the way, otherwise my slot will be gone and I have to rebook and pay again. Luckily, Dad was 5 minutes away who came with his sedan. Disaster averted. Or so I thought. Asks me to do a U-turn on a farm road. Single lane each side with a ditch on either side. Impossible to do based on turning circle of the car. I attempted the largest angle possible, but due to ditch on either side, ends up being a 3-point turn. He asks me if I'm deaf and if I know what a U-turn is. Politely try to explain it's not possible, which I'm sure he knew. Completed the test and passed everything else. Failed me and told me to come back when I learned to drive. Rebooked the next day and passed with a different instructor. This was in 05. Fast forward 15 years, he's actually in the news and sentenced to jail for accepting bribes. In hindsight, he made a comment of some sort of reparation for not fitting in the car, and it makes sense now. Story 16. My old driving instructor told me about a kid that pulled into the drive-thru at McDonald's, ordered some food, then realized he left his wallet in his other car, was using the instructor's car. He wanted the instructor to pay for his food and said he would offer half of his fries in return. The wallet also contained his license. So, The instructor failed him on the spot, told him to get out of the car. Story 17. First time I took the driving test, having never parallel parked before because I live in the suburbs, I tried it and was like 3 feet from the curb. Second time I back into the space perfectly. Instructor says, okay, just pull forward a foot and you're good. Excited that I did it, I never put it in drive and reversed over the cones. Third time it was pouring rain. I drove the exact speed limit, and afterwards he told me I was driving too fast in the rain but passed me anyway. Story 18. When I went to take mine, the DMV was across the highway from the truck stop. I made a right turn onto the highway to get onto the interstate. Right after I turned onto the highway, a semi turned left onto the highway. But he went across 4 lanes into my lane. The tester got silent. I'd seen what he was doing and had slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder and then into a driveway until the semi passed us. When it was all clear, I signaled and pulled back onto the highway and then onto the interstate behind the semi. The tester told me to turn around at the next exit. I'd passed. Story 19. I guess I sort of fit the criteria. Prior military, and after being certified for a long time in the Coast Guard as a truck and trailer driver for transporting small boats to boat launch ramps, I would take the new guys out to practice driving with the trailer, working the hitch, basic maintenance, hand signals for spotters, making sure they don't jackknife the damn thing in reverse, and backing the boat/trailer up into a garage/boat ramp. Young kid just out of boot camp was with me for the day while we drove down to a ramp to offload a boat, and crew, to work a few ranges, water lights, for the day. It was the kid's final sign-off, and he was to take the empty trailer and boat back to base alone after I joined the crew on the water. He'd driven with me as a passenger successfully many times by this point, and had all his sign-offs done and was endorsed by command to be rewarded his driver letter. Cut to several hours later, and our boat is mooring up at the base pier, and no new guy and truck in sight. Huh, that's weird. So I called the kid and tried to find out where he is. Long story short, on the way home, he stopped off at an ice rink to screw around and have fun, but illegally parked in a handicapped spot. The government vehicle got towed, but instead of calling us, he got an Uber home, turned off his phone, and hid in his barracks. Had to get command to negotiate with the city to get the truck out of impound, and the bean counters over at command and federal auditors over with the government vehicle procurement were not happy. He did not get his certification. Story 20. I'm not going to say without batting an eye, but I used to run a driving school where my absolute worst and best student was the same person. He was deeply dedicated to the material, honest to a fault, and had studied everything so hard that he aced every on-paper exam. Then he would get behind the wheel and basically have a panic attack. He could do it, but he just had the worst case of nerves I'd seen in my life. Poor SpongeBob was still trying to get his license last I heard. Story 21. I'm a driver's license tester. It's just one of the many roles at my job. We test on a course, so there really isn't that much room for insane mess-ups. I go over everything before the exam just to refresh their memory because of nerves. I walk through the whole test, and the second we go out the door, it all disappears. I had one kid back into a car when we were leaving the spot to start the test. Didn't understand why he failed because he said the car, quote, wasn't on the course. Our parking section has cones to simulate cars. I've had kids plow over the cones, run them over, back over them, and continue on thinking they're doing well. The only people I've had drive on the wrong side of the road are people from different countries who are used to driving on that side, and then realize a few seconds later with an oh crap look. Nothing too insane. Story 22. I should have technically failed mine, as when I did my turn across the oncoming lane, a car was reasonably close coming towards us. We get back to the registry and the tester says, I could have failed you there, but it was raining. There was a dark, low cloud, and it was a black car without its lights on coming over the crest of a hill. So I gave you the benefit of the doubt. Well, fantastic, I think. So that afternoon, I go for my first solo drive. And as I'm pulling into a shopping mall, I completely miss a pedestrian crossing sign and nearly run someone down. I slam on the brakes at the last second and am apologizing profusely, and she's just staring at me. It was the woman who did my test. She just shook her head and drove off. Thanks for the benefit of the doubt, though. Story 23. I witnessed some girl from a different country. She barely spoke our language, failed the parking part of the exam. Basically, you had 6 things you could do and 4 are required. We had to stop at a stop sign almost perfectly, easy because you can't get to speed, then parallel park, 3-point turn, and park in a normal parking space like you would find in every lot. The only requirement was that you don't touch any of the stuff used to corner the different parts, and you have 3 tries. When you touch something, you instantly lose. So this girl literally took apart the exam place. She even got a second try even though the law forbid it. Her father was livid that the examiner wouldn't let her pass and tried to fight him. In the end, he paid for the damages and drove his daughter home. Story 24. Heard this story from my driving instructor in high school. He was giving a kid a lesson and they were on the highway. He asked the student to pass a car that was driving a little slow. The student signals, merges into the left lane, and gently accelerates. Everything is going well when suddenly the student exclaims, "Oh my, I'm sorry, I forgot to shift the gear into pass." The instructor is momentarily confused, until it's too late, as the student reaches for the automatic gear shifter and throws it towards P while traveling at 65 miles per hour. This was not good for the car. Oh, screw the car. I don't think that's good for anyone's heart. That poor instructor, watching it happen but having no way to stop it and just being like, well, this is, probably how I go, huh? Horrifying. Story 25. When I was 17, I lived in Ohio and went in for my driver's test to obtain my license. Where I lived, the state patrol officer was the one who rode along with you and administered the test. It was intimidating to have a state patrol officer riding along with you. I passed my test with only one minor mistake. The blunder part comes while I was waiting for them to print out my card. The office was very busy that day and definitely near capacity. Not a chair was empty. While I sat there, another kid came in from his test, his head hanging low. A patrol officer followed him with a gruff look on his face. This officer had to be 6'5" and a mountain of a man. The boy walked over to his father and was explaining he had failed his test. The father lost his mind and walked over to the officer. He then proceeded to put his finger in the officer's face and yell at him. At this point, the entire room went silent and watched. "How dare you fail my son? He's a good driver. Turning left into a turn lane and merging into traffic is not illegal." It is in that part of Ohio, by the way. The officer smirked and looked around, knowing everyone was watching this now, and then said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Sir, it is illegal, and I can show you where in the book it states that." He then pulled out the driving laws book and showed him. "But sir, that isn't the reason I failed your son. He failed because he was doing 45 in a school zone." The entire room began to snicker. The father quickly grabbed his son and ran out. Telling on yourself in front of an officer is less than ideal. That being said, I don't think I really understand what they're saying here. Turning left into a turn lane and merging into traffic is illegal? I don't quite get it. Like if there's 3 lanes, they're in the middle lane and they're like, oh crap, I need to turn. So they're trying to turn left into the turn lane. That you can't do that? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Story 26. Not a tester, but when I was in high school, there was a guy who was known for failing the driver's license test multiple times. The most notorious story was that one of the times he failed, it was because he fell asleep at the wheel during the test. I and a couple of friends asked him directly if it was true. He was obviously embarrassed, but confirmed it was. He fell asleep at the wheel for a few seconds with the DMV tester right next to him. We asked how that's possible when most people are nervous. Still embarrassed, he mumbled something about being sleepy and hurried away from us. We let it drop, but never got a better answer out of him. Story 27. I have a story from when I was a beginner driver. My mom used to take me out to drive so I could get practice. I had my license, but was still green. On a certain crossroad, my mom sees someone cross ignoring the red light. Looking at them, she sardonically says, "Sure, this red signal doesn't apply. Let's just drive ahead." Being too focused on driving to notice the tone of voice and interpret this as something other than an instruction, I did exactly that. Drove straight past the red light. Good thing it was nighttime, so there was next to nobody on the road, but it was spooky after the fact. Story 28. I remember my driver's test very clearly. First of all, I was a smart, overly arrogant little jerk. I procrastinated and never got my learner's permit until I was like 4 months away from turning 16. This meant I could only get my license 2 months after turning 16 because you were required to have your permit for 6 months before you can get your license in my state. So anyway, finally waited out the 6 months and felt like I knew what I was doing. I had to take the test in my dad's Cadillac DeVille, an enormous boat of a car. Part of the test was a 3-point turn. I aced it. Or I thought so. Also, part of the test was slamming on the brakes. I aced that too. I thought. Then he asked me to stop at a stop sign. Boom. Simple. Then the test was pretty much over. He asked me to park and I pulled right into the spot. The tester spent what seemed like forever adding crap up on his sheet and he was like, "Well, you passed. You can go in and get your license." Being the little jerk I was like, "Was there anything I did wrong?" Fully expecting him to tell me how great of a driver I was. He was like, "Well, at the beginning of the test, you started backing out of the spot before looking, and you eventually did look, but you would have run someone over if they were standing directly behind your car. Once you pulled out of the parking lot, you hit the accelerator hard and had to correct your steering to stay in the lane fast enough that you would have lost control of the car if it was raining. Your 3-point turn was accomplished, but not done safely since you weren't looking both ways. Also, you pulled too far forward and too far backward, much more than you needed. Your hands were on the wheel, but I was not confident you had a good grip on the wheel when it mattered most. You stopped at the stop sign and you were behind the white line, but you failed to approach slowly after moving forward after the stop. Your right turns were close to cutting the curb. Your left turns were much too early. When you tested fast braking, you let go of the brake pedal and hit it again, which increased braking distance. You basically barely passed. I hope you become a better driver after this. I went from being a little cocky jerk to feeling like I was barely cutting it. Seriously, it made me put effort into driving. Total wake-up call. I swear I'm a good driver today, age 37, partly because of him pointing out all the nuances I missed with my inexperience. That is absolutely a W tester if I've ever heard of one. It's good he told you everything you did wrong and why. It wasn't just like you screwed up this, you screwed up this. It was like you screwed this up because you could have murdered someone. So hey, the wake-up call worked. Story 29. Not a tester, but I was in the back seat of the car when it happened. I'd just taken my third and final driving test and passed it without a hitch. No problem. However, the driving route was just going to another kid's house to pick her up. Pretty standard. So as I pull up to the driveway, the driving instructor says, "Just be ready." She's never even sat in the driver's seat of a car before. I didn't think too much of it because my first time driving was also with the instructor, and it went well. Anyway, we get in and start driving off. Not even 45 seconds later, we get to a stop sign, and she doesn't stop. So the instructor slams on his brake and his footwell. She was confused as to why she was stopping. So she continued to press down on the accelerator harder, like to the floor. Lots of screaming telling her to stop. After about 15 seconds of that, she puts the car in park and blows the transmission. It was some 80s Volvo and the car was pretty much junked. It's funny, as we were driving, my instructor was telling me how he was surprised the car was still going. Had about 300,000 miles on it. Story 30. I was a kid with a crappy tester. He wasn't even supposed to be a tester, but the normal person wasn't there for some reason, so I got stuck with him. He didn't know the path we were supposed to take super well and was telling me to turn as we were passing the turn. So of course that led to some sharp, sudden turns. At the end he said I didn't do bad enough to fail, but he didn't feel confident passing me, which is some bull crap. If I did everything right, I didn't fail. I came in like a week later and passed easily with the normal tester. But I'm still irritated about that crap to this day. Story 31. During my exam years ago, I saw a car at a very high speed cross the 2 lanes on my side of the road at a 45-degree angle, hop the curb, drive over the median, cut off a bunch of cars on the other side of the road into the ditch, and then was launched into the air about 3 feet. I exclaimed loudly, and the tester hadn't seen a thing happen. Story 32. After taking my eye test that I cheated on, I was walking out to the car park to get into the car with my examiner, and another kid was getting ready to pull out. He reversed instead and hit the car behind. More of a love tap, really. I just heard him shout and apologize that he wasn't ready and could they start over, which his examiner for some reason seemed okay with. However, when pulling out this time, he went forward out of the parking bay but turned far too early and scratched the car next to him. He was told to stop and get out. Kid failed in less than a minute and didn't fully understand why, since both the cars he hit only had minor damage. Story 33. My dad's a driver's ed teacher. Every week when we go to eat lunch, he has a story about how he almost died the previous week. Most of them involve the kids not knowing their left from right, which is kind of understandable if you've never driven before and are nervous. But he says most of the time it's kids trying to multitask, changing the radio or grabbing their phone. After a few months and a couple of near misses, he makes the student driver hand him their phone and only he can mess with the radio. Some of these stories, the kids aren't even the problems, it's other drivers. The car had 4 giant magnetic stickers that say student driver in black and yellow font on the front, back, and sides of a silver Chevy Impala. Other drivers will get close and try to intimidate the kids by honking, revving up, or bass boosting their music. I've been driving for 18 years and I know that still screws with me. God knows how the kids feel. In the first half of this year, he did have this terrible student driver story. The girl would just freeze up at random. He said this went on for 2 weeks before he had to just fail her out of the course. One time she popped a curb because there was a squirrel in the road. Then there was the time she almost ran a red light, plowed right into a smart car, and, my favorite, she forgot which pedal was the brake and which was the gas. He said they sat there in the parking lot of the school for 10 minutes so she could remember. Story 34. Not a tester, but was in the car when this happened. Where I learned it, all of the kids went in pairs to drive. One kid would drive an hour away, then the students would switch roles and others would drive back. All the while, the instructor helps and gives advice. I'd finished my part of the driving and was sitting in the back trying not to get car sick. I'd done this a couple of times before with some other fellow classmates, but this one was extraordinarily more bumpy than the others. We stop at a red light and the kid needs to turn left. So he turns on the signal, looks both ways and begins to turn, while the light was red, and there is barely a big enough gap in traffic to get through. The teacher stops him and asks what he's doing. He replies, "If you're turning right and the light is red and no one's coming, you can turn. Isn't it the same for turning left?" I'm not sure if he passed the class, but it was one of the most stressful drives in my life. Story 35. I got pulled over by a cop during my driving test and passed. He walked up oddly, as if he's looking for something to get me on. "Is this your car?" Yes. Okay, have a good day. I look over at my driving instructor and realize her head doesn't clear the headrest. So to the cop, it looked like I was driving alone on my driving test. The cars say student driver. We were about 5 minutes from finishing the test. Story 36. When I was in the army, I had this driving instructor who was the best. Was almost at the age where he could retire. The guy had seen it all. He would tell the story where he was practicing with a guy in an armored tracked vehicle. At one point, they were encountering a roundabout, and he instructed the guy to continue straight ahead, meaning they would pass the roundabout and take the second exit. The guy did exactly that, driving straight through over the roundabout. Couldn't stop laughing when I heard that story. Still gives me a big smile when I think of it. Story 37. Not a tester, but recently a buddy did this. I took a friend on the route that I had taken with that same DMV for my license, and the route that my sister-in-law had taken at the same DMV as well. In return, my friend showed the buddy all 3 routes when he went for his license test. Because all 3 of ours went through the park and were very similar, with one side street difference, he figured he was going through the park. So without the license tester saying anything, Buddy pulls into the park and goes through it. No blinker and didn't drop his speed. Mind you, when you got on the main road, the speed limit was 35 and then drops to 25. Such a busy road and so many signs you barely noticed the 25, but obviously when on the way to DMV, sister-in-law stressed to me, I stressed to my friend, and friend supposedly stressed to Buddy. Then when you enter park, it's automatically 15, but it's a hill. Still 15, but much easier to end up going faster. All in all, Buddy failed because of his reverse. License tester didn't write anything about the park, just laughed and said we were funny for taking him the routes we went, especially since it was the same guy I did mine with. Story 38. I was waiting for my license test, sitting in my car in the rain. I'm looking out the window and I see a gentleman walking toward my car. He knocks on the window and asks me if I was waiting for a road test. I said yes, and he hopped in. Supposedly, the previous test was so bad the punk kid with his mom in the back failed so miserably by running stop signs and passing cars in a residential neighborhood. When the tester failed him, he kicked him out of the car about half a mile from the registry, made him walk all the way back. I just so happened to be playing this guy's favorite song, so let's just say I passed that with flying colors. Story 39. Not a tester, but I have talked to one, and he told me a story about a 16-year-old guy. During the test, the kid had to slow down because an old lady was crossing the street ahead of him. When he pulled up next to her, he stepped on the brake, pulled the window down, and started screaming. He called her an old hag and started a tirade that was laced with curse words about her not crossing at a traffic light. He did not understand that going out of your way to verbally abuse elderly pedestrians is not okay during the test. I wonder what that kid was thinking. Was he think he was going to get brownie points for being like, I know the rules of the road, watch this? Nah, dude, you're just a jerk. Sure, she could be doing something wrong, but you don't have to yell at her. Story 40. This thread feels like a personal attack. Obligatory disclosure that I'm not the person who scores test takers, but I took the driving test last year. I get in the car, watch the dude go through all my documents and wait for him to finish writing, and then he says, "Okay, start the car. This is my moment, and I'm gonna shine." So I start the car and put it into reverse. Look at my rearview mirror and turn my head to try pull out, but the car doesn't move the way it's supposed to. It seems impossible, but maybe it's slightly rolling backwards. Okay, weird. My foot is on the brake. I try again and my instructor tells me to start the car and I'm just like, what? But whatever, I make a show out of starting the car again even though it's already started and do the exact same steps. But damn, I'm not moving. He says, "Ma'am, you need to start the car." And now I'm just thinking, what a freaking idiot. The car is started, the radio is playing, I don't know what else I can do. I again move the key angrily this time and then, bam, I turn the key all the way and I hear the engine come to life. I am deeply ashamed. My driving instructor is watching me and appalled, and my test taker lets me go around the block as a courtesy. Now I stay home and thus don't need a license because I'm never showing my face in public again. Story 41. I was the passenger during driver's ed. Another kid was driving. Instructor was making small talk asking how his family was doing. Kid says his dad had a heart attack and died the night before. He didn't even have a reaction, just completed the drive. We got back to his house and he got out. We sat in the driveway for a minute and both started crying. Pretty bizarre, to say the least. Story 42. They don't check their mirrors, use their blinkers, and think texting on the phone is not wrong. Fights you about it, then has their mother come up and tell you, owner of a traffic school, that we sold her, quote, something else, and berated us, insulted us, and told us we'd failed her son. We taught him everything, did the driving test in our vehicle as practice, We used to work for the DMV about 20 times. The kid fails before he even leaves park because he didn't check his mirrors or put on a seatbelt as we've instructed, and started to text on his phone 24 seconds. And a girl once closed her eyes on the highway and sped us off into a ditch because she was scared of speeding vehicles on a highway. I will simply never understand why people feel so compelled to text while driving. I know this was like just before or whatever, but first of all, it's a driving test. All of the rules are turned up to 11. And two, like, it can wait? I don't know. Seems like common sense that while driving, essentially, piloting what could be a lethal weapon, you would not distract yourself. I just thought that was, common sense. Story 43. My idiotic self drove on the wrong side of the road and instantly failed. The test was given in a closed-off testing area, not the actual street, and the person in front of me was on the wrong side of the road, and I asked the tester if I was supposed to be on that side. He was like, "What do you think?" Me, being an idiot, thought, well, since this is a self-contained track, I guess I have to be on that side to complete the test. So embarrassing. Story 44. Not a tester, but I always like to share the story of my great-grandfather. He took the driver's test and got his license at 14. Legally, it's 16 in Kentucky, but he lied and told the DMV, the Navy, and my great-grandmother he was 2 years older than he actually was. Fast forward 70-ish years, he goes to renew his license and they finally realize he'd lied about his birth date on his original license. They still let him renew, but he had to change his birth date on all kinds of paperwork. Story 45. It was my great-grandma's funeral the day I took my test. Since it took months to get testing appointments where I live, my parents had me take the test as planned, and then we would go straight to the funeral. I was a casket bearer, so I wore a full suit to my driver's test in the middle of July. I was hot, miserable, and thinking about a funeral. During the cornerback, I was so distracted by how hot and uncomfortable I was that I missed a cone and tapped it with my bumper. It tipped over. I'm not sure why, but I proceeded to continue attempting to park by running over the cone. The instructor asked me, "What if that cone was a child?" To which I responded, "They would be dead?" I failed. Well, great news, OP. You were already dressed for the occasion. Story 46. Not the kid, but the examiner. I was taking the exam, but due to a mix-up in the system, there was no one assigned to be my tester. No problem. There was a written exam going on, so the retired 80-plus instructor who oversaw the written exam would do my exam, and my driving instructor did the written test. He needed to be there since the test was performed in his specially equipped car, with pedals on the passenger side to intervene to avoid accidents. So I was expecting an easy exam. Just drive around for an hour long and hope he didn't die of old age. Everything went well for the first half an hour, but when we got to a big road, the car kept speeding up after I took my foot off the gas pedal. The gas pedal was stuck. I banged the clutch to the floor and remembered the Corey Haim/Feldman instructional video License to Drive, where they fixed this problem by kicking down the gas pedal repeatedly while calmly telling my examiner that the pedal was stuck. He quickly identified the problem. The stuff he'd been using as a footrest were the instructor pedals. After he removed his foot from the gas pedal, the problem was solved and we both lived. Story 47. As a smart aleck 16-year-old, I made a joke that stop signs with a white edge, i.e. a standard stop sign in Canada, were actually yield signs if no traffic was around. Someone took it seriously, she did her road test, and did not pass. The next day, she storms up to me and just yells, "They are not yield signs, jerk!" I had no idea what was happening. It was really just a throwaway lame joke from a couple days ago. Oh well. Story 48. I'm not a tester, but I work for a roadside assistance company sending out tows for people. We had a driversed.com agent call us up to set a tow for a testing vehicle that managed to go off the road, into a ditch, then out of the ditch on the other side, then up an embankment, and was now lodged in a tree. I tried so hard to keep it professional, but I was dying trying not to laugh. And finally, I just had to ask, did they pass? After about 15 seconds of dead silence, the driving instructor just came back with a hard no. Story 49. A good friend of mine worked at the DMV for almost 50 years and did a lot of the driver's tests. 2 crazy stories he told me which I remember. 1. This Indian couple came in and the wife was testing to get her license. They were new American citizens, so they weren't totally used to the culture and there was still a bit of a language barrier going on. The DMV my friend worked at also happened to be near a busy train yard. So they get out on the road and the lady is doing fine. Nothing major wrong with her driving. My friend decides it's time to turn around and end the test, so he tells her to take a right after the train crossing ahead. The lady pulls up to the train crossing, stops, looks both ways for train, and then turns right onto the train tracks. My friend frantically tells her to stop the car and get out immediately. She does, and he jumps in the driver's seat, slams it in reverse, and right after he pulls the car away from the tracks, the train signal comes down to block the crossing, and a train comes through. Needless to say, she didn't pass. And 2. This was the event that actually ended his career, causing him to retire. He was testing a young girl who was just getting her license, and she was very nervous and shaky the whole time. She was making little mistakes here and there, swerving, not checking mirrors, not fully stopping, things like that. At this point, he decided she wasn't going to pass, so he asked her to go back to the office. On the way back, there was an area of road under construction with a bridge and one lane closed. The kind where they put up cement barricades that narrow the road much more than normal. The girl was shaking like crazy, going through the tight space, and some combination of nerves, inexperience, and bad luck came together, and she ended up slamming on the accelerator instead of braking, turning off into a work area downhill over the shoulder of the bridge, and slamming into the back of a massive backhoe. The bucket of the machine came through the windshield and smashed into my friend's head. He was in a coma for 2 days, broke his neck and shoulder, suffered mild permanent brain damage, and now has PTSD and won't be in a car when he isn't driving. The girl ended up unscathed, thankfully, but my friend says he's never been the same. Not as sharp. Everything seems to take more effort now. He ended up winning a huge settlement and is getting his pension early since he was close to retirement, so he retired then and lives pretty comfortably now. I was not expecting this one to get that tragic. Like, I know OP said it caused his retirement, but I just didn't expect this. Oh my, I'm glad they're okay, first of all, OP. What a horrifying situation, and yeah, I wouldn't want to be a passenger in a car after that either. I get it. Man, that's rough. Story 50. Happened to me during my driver's test. Pouring down rain and the lady gets out to check all my lights and turn signals, etc. So when she's done, she finally gets in my truck and we're about to start. For some reason, my car wouldn't shift into reverse and I started to panic and was confused as to how this happened when I drove it perfectly fine to the DMV. She then proceeds to say to me, "So, did you turn it on?" My dumb butt only had it turned into accessory mode for the lights and never turned my truck on. Only missed 2 points and got my license still. Story 51. Story from Pennsylvania. We have lots of tractor trailers on the roads here. Lots. Arguably too many. And they can often be terrifying to drive around. Anyways, we could take our license test through the high school, and the teacher often let us ride along on each other's tests to see how it goes. I was in the back seat as the student testing pulls onto the interstate at 35 miles per hour. A tractor trailer comes barreling downhill on us and lays into his horn. The teacher starts telling the kid to move with the flow of traffic, aka speed up. He starts going 45 miles per hour and is clearly super nervous. We're going one exit on I-83. It's only 2 lanes each way and no shoulder, as the highway is sandwiched between a large hill and a lake. I don't know how many tractor trailers went screaming by us in those 2 to 4 miles, but they kept honking and swerving to avoid us. The instructor is shouting and cursing at the kids to speed up. I thought we were gonna die. I'm surprised none of them jackknifed or tipped over, to be honest. Story 52. My road test was being proctored by the son of my mom's coworker. We were driving through a residential street and his cell phone rang. It was his mom asking how I was doing on the test. We had a laugh and kept going. About 10 minutes later, I'm doing the highway portion, which was under construction at the time. They were resurfacing and the lanes were separated by cones. I was going around a curve and ended up swinging a little wide, panicked due to workers on the shoulder, and ended up running over 3 of the cones. The guy was like, "Should you be hitting those cones, OP?" And I said, "I don't know. Should you be taking personal calls in the middle of my test, Andy?" He laughed, said, "Fair enough." And we finished without issue. It was a good time. Story 53. Not me, but our driving school teacher told our class about 2 things that happened to him. 1. He pulled up to the girl's house who was going to be taking the test. He sees her sitting on a swing by the side of the house with a table in front of it. He honks to get her attention, to which she waves, makes a chopping motion on the table, then proceeds to presumably snort whatever she just cut. She then calmly heads over to the car and says, "I'm ready," to which he responded in a sassy tone, "No, you're not." And 2. A girl got pulled over shortly after her driving test while she still had her permit license. Apparently, a squirrel darted out on the road in front of her, so she swerved her car into a tree to avoid hitting the poor squirrel. Not only that, but the officer that came to the crash scene asked if she was texting and driving, to which she responded no. However, the imprint of her phone on her face said otherwise. She had to go back to testing for that. Story 54. When I went to take my final test, the guy behind me was getting his motorcycle license. We both left at the same time. I went left and they went right. Thought nothing of it. Passed my test, no problem. Drove back to the DMV. I see the motorcycle guy in the parking lot. When I park, I notice both he and the instructor are covered in road rash. The instructor was holding a bandage to his arm and the bike was scratched to hell. I assume he didn't pass. Story 55. Years ago, this kid was driving just fine until they had to stop at a blinking red traffic light. The kid clearly never read the manual or at least had forgotten what the heck to do at a red traffic light. He just idled there, stopped at the light for a solid 60 seconds, not a car in sight. Eventually, I just said, let's go back. He failed the test right there and then according to the rubric, and he kind of knew he did something stupid, but at least an easily fixable mistake for the next one. Story 56. Not a tester, but a friend recently asked me to teach his girlfriend to drive, because I have an automatic and he doesn't. She's 24, but I guess due to recently resolved medical issues, she was only now able to get her license. So I go into it thinking she just needed some more seat time. He failed to inform me she had actually never driven before at all. But oh well, I've taught a few people how to drive, and I'm on track to be an instructor, so no big deal. So it starts out okay-ish. She has no idea what a turn signal is, has very little grasp of speed and doesn't handle stress too well, but we're improving and getting more comfortable. We get onto a major street where the speed limit is 35 miles per hour, at which point when I ask her to change lanes, she forgets she's on the gas and gets up to about 55. As I tell her to slow down, she goes for the lane change. No look or anything, just whoop, changes lanes. I knew we were clear, but that scared the hell out of her boyfriend in the back seat. I have her go to a neighborhood I know well, and coming up to it, there was a bump. I warn her, and after she hits the bump too fast, she comes to a hard stop. There is apparently a Suburban behind us that is following too closely and nearly rear-ends us, but we're fine. A few hundred feet later is a stop sign where she is hard on the brakes again, and he again almost rear-ends us. She continues, and unfortunately he stays behind on a 2-lane road again, following too closely. So I tell her to make a left at the next street. She starts to slow down and I inform her of the blinker. As she puts on the blinker, she comes off of the brake, and we're now traveling too fast and have passed the street. To my surprise, she still goes for the turn, pointing the car towards the curb and a house. I call for more brake, which is promptly met with just an application of throttle. At this point, I reach over and grab the wheel hard right, and the car slides slightly but actually rotates and gets us heading back down the 2-lane street, albeit now on the wrong side of the road and next to the idiot in the Suburban. At this point, she has come off the gas and we get slow down and pull over to a safe spot. After that, her nerves were shot and she couldn't continue. I realized she needed 20 to 40 more behind the wheel hours training, handed her the number to a friend's driving school where the cars have instructor brakes. No lie, I thought I was going to lose my car on this one. Story 57. I went to take my motorcycle test. Parked the bike outside, went in, sorted some paperwork, walked out with the robotic examiner. My bike wasn't there. My bike was stolen. Without a flinch of interest, he just said, "Oh, test canceled. You'll need to rebook," and walked back inside. I had a quick search and found another job's worth had wheeled it around the back because he thought it had been abandoned. Seriously, outside of a motorcycle test center. Went back inside and the examiner had already started eating his lunch. He made me wait 20 minutes. Passed me though. Story 58. I passed on my first try, but the examiner explained one of the skills awkwardly. The skill was to, quote, reverse quickly and come to a stop without locking the tires. I interpreted this as slam on the frickin' gas and stop on a dime without losing my crap. I got points taken off for blowing past 10 miles per hour in reverse. What the hell, bro? I nailed it, as you described. Story 59. When my mother was taking her driving test many moons ago, the tester told her at one point to go straight through the stop sign. She certainly didn't hear the pause and just went straight through the stop sign without stopping. He freaked out, saw his life pass before his eyes, I'm sure. He asked why the hell she didn't stop at the stop sign. She yelled back, "You said go straight through!" And she passed. Side note, I was a 2-year-old and in the back seat through all this. Story 60. When my instructor picked me up, she had the girl before me drive to my house, then drive herself back home. On the way back to her place, the girl ran 3 stop signs and drove through about 3 houses worth of bushes on the passenger side. When I got in the driver's seat to do my training, I asked how that previous training went, and she literally said, "That girl is never getting her license." I guess the ride to my house was somehow worse than when she was driving herself back home. Story 61. All of these happened in Australia. One of the tests I sat in on during my training was a young lady who was on her 2nd or 3rd try. We made it to the end of the driveway and we were ready to turn right. She took the turn way too sharp/early and ended up driving on the wrong side of the road for about 40 meters before we could get her back on the correct side of the road, as we were running parallel to a massive traffic island. Some stroke of luck/miracle meant at the time there was no oncoming. Another girl drove all the way down our 80-meter driveway with the handbrakes still engaged. The examiner stopped her when the burning smell hit and asked her if there were any warning lights on her dashboard, or if she needed to adjust any of her controls or instruments. She said no, and kept driving to the end of the driveway before he told her to stop. I was in an assessment recently and the girl was instructed to turn left at the traffic lights ahead. She decided not to stop at the clearly visible red light, and I had to use the handbrake to stop her. I asked her if she had control of the foot brake, and she did. I then explained the red light was for us. She then proceeded to try and run the light again, almost immediately. Good times. Story 62. I can tell you the worst that happened during my exam. I was driving and the instructor, who I later found out was a cop, asked me to parallel park behind a cop car, which is scary. But, I can do this. And then, as I was doing it, a pickup came and crossed the road to park front bumper to front bumper with this cop car. The driver jumps out and runs into the house, and we hear screaming. The instructor told me calmly to leave the area without parallel parking, which is good because I suck at it. Story 63. When I was in school during my driver's test, we had pairs of students in the car with the instructor. I stopped at a red light, and when I started up after it had turned green, my tires squeaked. Nothing happened or anything, but the student in the car with me had fallen asleep and woke up screaming that I'd gotten into an accident. About 2 years later, I was in a fast food restaurant and he was working the front. He yells out to the entire back staff, "Hey, guys, this is the girl I was telling you about. This squeaked the tire." Story 64. Not a tester, but a student. During driver's training, I got paired up with this girlfriend-boyfriend combo. The girl kept drifting to the left and jerking right to the center, all night long. Girl ends up drifting too far while going through an intersection, and the instructor pulls the wheel to the right to keep us from hitting another car head on. This girl has the audacity to jerk the wheel back to the left to break the instructor's grip on the wheel. Instructor obviously freaks out on her and tells her to not ever jerk the wheel away from him ever again. As if that wasn't dramatic enough, the boyfriend in the back seat with me starts yelling at the instructor and kicking his seat, screaming for the instructor not to ever talk to his girlfriend that way, blah, 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 blah. It was an awkward ride that night, as the boyfriend was next up to drive and I was last after him. Story 65. Let me tell you about my first driving test. First, I hit the only pothole in the parking lot. I swear we got airborne, even though I was only creeping along, maybe 5 miles an hour. I took a left turn out of the parking lot, stopped at a stop sign, and took a right. I drove a couple blocks and took another right, and this is where all the trouble started. First, there was a group of 5 kids on bicycles weaving back and forth. I stopped until they got out of the road. A little further down, an old lady wandered out of her driveway and halfway across the road before she even looked around and saw me. Then I started going once again, and once I got back up to road speed, a squirrel jumped off a tree into the road. So I slammed on the brakes, missed the squirrel, and started driving again. Same damn squirrel appeared in front of me again and was obviously not well. Once I finally made it off that road and it was time to turn right to head back to the testing place, I was so flustered that I stopped and waved the car on the cross street. He had a stop sign I had right of way because I didn't want to turn with him sitting right there. I failed and I didn't drive again for 3 years. After I finally did get my license, I learned how to drive a manual. The first time I drove, it was at night, and it all went well until I came to a 4-way stop and couldn't figure out how to stop the car. I kept pressing on what I thought was the brake, but nothing was happening. Luckily, there was nobody coming from either direction. I started to downshift so I could pull over and figure out what was happening and realized I'd been pressing on the clutch pedal, not the brake pedal. Story 66. This doesn't fit your question exactly, but thought it might fit here anyway. When I took my driving test, I used my grandma's car since it had an e-brake in the middle. It was an old grandma car. Wouldn't guess it to be worth more than $7,000, but it had a cassette player. Well, the old guy doing my driving test went nuts over it. Talked the whole time about how he had a bunch of tapes and would love to buy the car. Not wanting to get on the wrong side of the instructor, I just played the fence, saying stuff like, well, I'll have to think on it, I'll have to see, blah, blah, blah. We did a single lap in a neighborhood and he passed me. No backing up, no parallel parking, didn't even hit a main road. We got back, I passed, and I told him the car was my grandma's and wasn't mine to sell. I scurried away with my passing papers. Surely cassette players are in at least enough cars that he wouldn't have to buy that one exactly. Like, surely you can even buy a cassette player to put in your car? I don't know, I'm completely ignorant about this side of things, so maybe I'm making a fool of myself. Story 67. My best friend and I took our tests the same day using his mom's car. I went first while he and his mom waited outside the DMV. Got some stoic Hispanic lady who was really nice but so scary. I pulled back into the parking lot after 15 minutes or so, and she directed me where to park. I turned the car off and she she says, "Okay, so you made 16 mistakes and the limit is 15 and we fail you. But all your mistakes were minor, so I'm going to knock one off for you because you made me laugh." Shook my hand and let me out. My friend gets in, does all the pre-check stuff and everything, and I'm sitting outside talking to his mom. They leave the parking lot and turn right. Not 2 minutes later, they pull back in. Absolute moron ignored a school bus stop sign not even 100 feet down the road. Story 68. On one of my learning drives, my instructor took a call from his soon-to-be ex-wife. I could hear her, and they were arguing about who gets to keep the couch. Well, he finally decides to get off the phone, and I'm slowing down for a yellow light. He tells me I have to speed up and do the speed limit, so I purposefully run the red light. He gets mad and asks why I did that, and I tell him because you told me to, with an implied, maybe you should pay more attention. For some reason, didn't have him for any more of my drives. Story 69. While I was in driving school out cruising around in this little Prius with my instructor, we entered a snow-covered parking lot, and my teacher said he wanted to, quote, check out the brakes on the car in the snow. He instructed me to get some speed going, so I gladly obliged and took off across the lot. Given the amount of snow and the low light, we were unable to notice that a street separated what we thought was just one continuous lot. I ended up tearing across the street and narrowly missed getting T-boned. Story 70. Not a tester, just a driver. In Alaska, you're allowed to get your permit at 14. Got my permit on my birthday. A week later, my dad drives to his work with my 11-year-old brother and my mom in the back seat. He's a pilot, and we park at his hangar at the international airport. He needed to get something from his plane on the ramp. Mom, from the back seat, says, "Hey, pull up to the fence so we can see." I hop in the driver's seat, pull up to the fence, and then don't stop. Hit the gas instead of the brake. Jump the railroad track they had to stop cars, and slam into the international airport fence. The next week, my dad had me convinced I would be arrested for breaching airport security and questioned as a terrorist. Fortunately, the company mechanics just went and straightened the fence, and no one ever knew. Also, in my defense, it was an '05 Toyota, the ones with the sticky gas. So there's a chance I fell victim to that. Story 71. I sped the entire test, 35 and a 25, and passed. Apparently, where I live, a residential street has a speed limit of 25. The street outside my house is 35. It's not a main street, but is fairly busy and totally residential. Without any signs, I did a solid 35. Even had a sign that flashed my speed back at me, no attached to limit sign. We finished and she said, "Did you notice the speed limit?" I said, 35, right? She said, "No, 25. Didn't you notice the flashing sign?" I said, "Yeah, but it didn't have a speed limit on it." She passed me. I know that was my third mark. California, you get 2 mistakes, I think, fail on third. Story 72. I'm not a tester, and this was during a driving technique class. But I was on a team with a guy and another girl. The guy and I, the guy re-earning his driver's license, were pretty okay at doing the things the instructor asked us to do. Emergency stops at different speeds, avoiding things at different speeds, and the like. However, this second girl could not do what the instructor asked her to do at all. When we had to do slalom, she would drive straight, but once she got that down, she would slalom. When she was supposed to do an emergency stop, or even slam the throttle instead of the brakes. I think we spent about an hour listening to the instructor going, "Car 1, go. Car 1, go. Girl's name. The stick 3 centimeters to the left and up. Girl's name. Remember to start in first gear." And once the instructor had to drive out onto the track to start the car for her. She also ended up puking twice due to the emergency stops and because of the instructor showing us what happened if you lost control over the car on a wet surface. Story 73. I'm English and I read somewhere we have the hardest test in the world. I don't know. My test was pretty ropey. I was absolutely crapping myself and immediately set the car alarm off when asked to get into the car and locked myself out. When driving at the national speed limit, he decided to ask some show me, tell me questions and asked me to operate the driver's side window. Bombing it along a busy main road, I didn't want to look down to see where the switch was. I knew it was there somewhere, but wasn't quite sure which it was. So I said, "Can I pull over in a bit and show you?" He was like, "Nope, you've got to be moving while you do it." So I just was like, well, no, then. We pulled over a bit later and he asked me again if I could show him while driving a lot slower, so looking down as I chugged along at 10 miles per hour, I was able to do it. He passed me first time. I put it down to being really polite and making conversation with him the whole time because I think I drove like crap that day. Story 74. I took the test when I was 17. It was 5 minutes before my exam and my car ended up getting slammed. The other driver was mostly at fault. But since my driving instructor was the one instructing me on what to do, he took the rest of the responsibility. I showed up to the DMV an hour late and still crying. Did okay, but forgot to look back when exiting after parallel parking. My examiner told me to park after the test ending and chewed me out about that one mistake, but ended up still passing me. Story 75. I messed up 3 times during my test, and I think at least one of them was an automatic fail. Still passed the first time, I don't know how. Driving up to the tester, there were parking spots. I double parked. crooked in the middle of the line. I hit a cone during parallel parking. I zoned out a little bit at a stoplight, watching people turning right and thinking what to do because of the aforementioned two. The light turned green and my instructor remained silent, and I only noticed when a left turner turned. I nearly missed the light. I believe I still passed it because I was very good about awareness otherwise. Like constantly showing and nearly over-dramatically showing, I was watching my speed and looking every possible way before doing anything. With all due respect, OP, you double parked going up to the place, and they still passed you? Double parking's pretty bad. You can look at it and be like, that's not right, and fix it before you go in and get the tester. But no, you just left it, at least you didn't say you fixed it, and zoning out at a stoplight, I've done that one. I was still in driving school though, not a test, but I get it. Anyway, that is all the stories for today. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.